cost of living.
Thank you, Ms. Leisure-Fernandez. Mr. Griffith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You know, Madam Chair, I'm listening to the discussion and I hear our colleagues saying that this rescissions package is merely a molecule in the makeup of federal spending. And then I wonder why they've spent so much time attacking the molecule. I think thou dost, no.
Because two things
no,
can be
my
true.
time. I think thou dost protest too much. It's my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Mr. Ranking Member. But I like to get through my stuff, and then if you want to say something, I might be willing to yield, but I like to get through my stuff. And so, you know, it's just kind of interesting. Let me also say that I agree with Mr. Scott when he says that what the USAID's mission was and what I understood it to be for most of my life, I support. I was on a trip a couple of years ago, went to a refugee camp in Africa, learned all about this peanut butter stuff that they helped to create and help to spread around, that if you can get this stuff, it comes in kind of a squeeze tube, and the stuff is incredible, and if you can get that to a child before their organs start shutting down, they live, and it doesn't take much time. It's amazing stuff. That's what I support. I support the USAID doing that. And since this controversy came up where it was clear that at least a significant portion of their money, I don't know how much, but more than a molecule, Madam Chair, was being spent on culture wars, and I don't think USAID is supposed to be involved in the culture wars on the right or the left. Doesn't matter to me whether it's coming from the right or the left. It's not our job to go in there and do that. Our purpose, as I understood their mission, Madam Chair, was to feed the little children and to do what they could do to make hunger less. And so I agree that it needs to be reorganized. I agree it needs to be revamped, and I think that the U.S. government, no matter what the agency is called in the future, needs to get back to the mission of making sure we're taking care of feeding those children. And when I talk to my constituents in the district about this, many of whom would tell you, because it's a relatively poor district, that they don't understand federal spending in foreign governments and so forth. They don't understand that. But when I talk to them about the peanut butter stuff, to a person, they nod and they go, yeah, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. So we may have to do some reorganization, but I just want to make it clear that I do support that because I'm going to talk about some other things. So, Madam Chair, I'm going to ask us to reflect back in time. The year is 2002. It's a tough time in the economy in Virginia. I was in the state legislature. We were facing a $2 billion shortfall. Legislature was out of session, and Virginia has a requirement to have a balanced budget. So the governor stepped in with the red pen and made cuts. That's what adults in leadership do. He cut 1,800 state jobs. Cuts were expected to cut up to 4,000 jobs at the state's universities and colleges. Community services were cut. Libraries were cut. Almost everything was on the table, including cultural items. One such program that was cut at the Library of Virginia, and which was one of my all-time favorites, Madam Chair, was the Virginia Cavalcade magazine. This is a part of my collection. They stopped publication in 2002 because the Commonwealth of Virginia could no longer afford it. And when I went and got my collection, I was just thrilled that the one that was on top was of the Little League game played in Norton in 1951, the first Little League game in the South with integrated teams. And it's fascinating to me because times change. People would think that the people of the mountains were racist, but in reality, it was the Charlottesville team that refused to let the integrated team play on their fields, so they had to play the game in Norton, in Southwest Virginia, in the mountains, in Appalachia. But this, by its own definition, it was the quarterly illustrated magazine of Virginia history and culture, and it did all kinds of things. It did art. This is a big article on an artist from Southwest Virginia named Walter Biggs. This was about the Powhatans, and on. And it was a marvelous publication, but the governor had to cut. He did what he had to do. While there was angst about a number of the cuts that had to be made, the governor did what he had to do. And as a result, a lot of things got cut. And then Governor Mark Warner, now senator in the United States Senate from Virginia, made those cuts because that's what adult leadership does. Sometimes when you're facing a deficit and a debt of almost $37 trillion, you have to figure out, what can we cut? What can we cut? And so I would ask my colleague from Alabama, because I've heard all kinds of things. The rescission bill is not the reconciliation bill, is it? In fact, the rescission bill is a bill to cut spending. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And I would say I've heard lots of stuff here today. In fact, we finished with, I forget whether it was killing, whacking, cutting off at the knees, Big Bird. What's fascinating is, let's get the facts straight. The rescission does not touch Big Bird. It touches the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It has always perplexed me, and this has been my position since the 90s when I first started studying this stuff. Why in the world the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS never got, and they may have changed something recently, but to my knowledge they have never gotten, and historically they didn't get any royalties from the corporation that owns Big Bird. They've never gotten any royalties, nothing, from Jim Henson Productions. Oh, they may pay for a particular show, they may, but the corporation owns all of those intellectual properties, and so when they do toys, dolls, Talking Elmo, when they do movies, and I heard today about spin-off TV shows, and if they're airing reruns, Corporation for Public Broadcasting gets nothing. And I understand that in the 1960s, that was fairly standard for television networks, but the production companies like Desilu, Viacom, Paramount, that would be the owners of the Star Trek merchandising and broadcasting rights, now partnered with CBS. But all of that, they've made billions, and these corporations have made billions. And I don't understand why, because those television stations got the benefit of having the non-public public television stations got advertising dollars. But why they didn't ask for that has always been perplexing to me. So let's get our facts straight, everybody. This is not going to have a huge impact on Big Bird because Big Bird's going to go somewhere else. Big Bird can go elsewhere, particularly if they may have a contract for now, but they can go elsewhere. Jim Henson originally worked for Jimmy Dean, and I got a story on that, but I won't tell it today. But he originally worked for Jimmy Dean. He was willing to give up some rights. We know that because he offered part of his corporation when he got the call to do work for PBS and on the company that was going to do Sesame Street. He offered Jimmy Dean part of his company, and they could have gotten a piece of it, and they didn't. And that's always perplexed me because then they wouldn't need to keep coming back to the government to ask for money. But Big Bird, Ernie, Cookie Monster, none of those are owned by PBS, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, or PBS. Now, it was a different world back in 1967. I mean, you had local calls, what today we would call local calls. I mean, today you can call the world pretty much local. But as late as 1993, to call inside of Roanoke County on telephones, you had to pay a toll. In the Virginia House of Delegates, I had to have special phones so people, my constituents, could call me without having to pay a toll, even though I only represented Montgomery County, Roanoke County, and the city of Salem, which is completely surrounded by Roanoke County and the city of Roanoke. And there was toll calls. The world has changed. And it really bothers me that everybody thinks that somehow that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting doesn't have to change with the times. When they were created for the television, we only got 2 channels at my house. we didn't have a big giant TV, and we weren't in the right spot to get ABC. We only got CBS and NBC. So PBS made sense to get some additional broadcasting. Today, everybody has access, some even free over the air, but to hundreds of channels. And so things need to change. And I've said this since the 90s. Now, NPR, the public radio local affiliates, a little bit different. I recognize that. They're a little bit different than the other, and I've long wanted to be helpful and supportive where I could to help them. But unfortunately, they're tied together. And maybe someday there'll be a bill or something that separates them out, and we can get that straightened out a little bit. But I have been confused here today, and maybe things are different in other parts of the country, because they don't do local news. They do regional news, they do state news, and they carry some national news that they get from various sources, but they don't carry local news. My district's 9,000 plus square miles. We've got basically two different networks of affiliate national radio programs. They can't do local news in every one of the communities that they're serving, so they do regional and state news. They don't do local news. And that's been talked about today, and I'm just not sure that it's certainly not accurate in my district. I can't speak to others and to what they do, but you know, they're all over the place. And then we get to the emergency broadcast system, as we used to call it. It may be the emergency alert system now, I don't know. But, Mr. Chairman, that's not a part of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. That's a completely separate agency, is it not, or a separate entity, is it not?
That's my understanding, yes.
Yeah, and so when you talk about the warnings for tornadoes and for storms, I'm not saying they don't carry some of that on the local National Public Radio affiliates, but that's not who you listen to. Because if you're listening to that for half my district, you're listening to what's going on in Roanoke. That's not you. That's not about half my district. You know, up on the in the Appalachian Mountains and on the plateau, it's not them. And likewise, a lot of the programming in deep Southwest comes out of Tennessee. It might be similar in some ways. They might say, hey, watch out in certain counties. I get that. But if you're in my home district, you're paying attention to your local TV station, or you're listening to your local AM, now with an FM transponder that gets it into FM, because they're going to zero in on a specific county. In fact, I got one of my counties where there's a mountain in between. You got one radio station on one side of the mountain and another radio station on the other side of the mountain, and you better be listening, because when the flood is hitting, you know, a specific area like Haysai, you better be on the right radio station, because if you're listening to the other one, they're not going to have any flood at all on that side of the mountain. All the water's on this side of the mountain. And so I've been a little perplexed by this wailing and gnashing of teeth, claiming that somehow we were going to have all these storms that people weren't going to know about, because if we relied on, and I'm not picking on the local affiliates of the public radio, I'm just saying that's not their role in our region. I can't speak for other regions of the country, but I got to believe in large rural districts, it's pretty much the same as mine. That's what I believe. And so I think that doing these rescissions is appropriate. I support it, and I just want to make, I mean, if we're going, we can have disagreements. That's what we do in Congress. We have disagreements. We fight it out, but let's get the facts right. Corporation for Public Broadcasting is not the emergency broadcast system that we all grew up with, maybe now the emergency alert system. Big Bird is not owned by PBS. Bert and Ernie are not owned by PBS. Jim Henson Productions is a separate entity. It's not owned by the production company for Sesame Street or PBS. And so when you talk about we're going to be kneecapping Big Bird, I submit we might be setting Big Bird free. Big Bird might make more money being set free to go into the private market area whenever their contract is up with PBS, and may be able to get more money nationally and internationally when they are set free. But that's a contract negotiation. It has nothing to do with this rescissions bill. And loving Big Bird and Bert and Ernie, and loving the story of the original Jim Henson Productions and how they got started on the Jimmy Dean show. He was originally a country music star, for those who don't know, and then took his money and went into sausage. But he didn't take Jim Henson's money. Because as I was telling you the other day, Madam Chair, he said to Jim Henson something along the lines of, son, that's your talent. I don't want any of your company. God gave you that talent. Go out and have success. But he got his start, Henson got his start on the Jimmy Dean show.
Madam Chair.
So there's a, oh, by the way, and by the way, Jim Henson's show was not on PBS. I know you're going to be shocked, Madam Chair. Jim Henson's show on which he was, the Jimmy Dean show, was a syndicated show on corporation for-profit television stations that used to run on Saturdays or Sundays, depending on what channel you were watching it on.
I know the chair, I know you're sensitive to the time. I just wanted to flag that. I know that's something you've been concerned about in the
All right, I yield back. Gentleman said I talked too long, so I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield? This is about the peanut butter issue that you said, because we're in agreement. That's called RUTF. It is the ready-to-use therapeutic food, and you're right. You do that, and you can save a child's life. But that is all part of the international disaster assistance, in which $500 million is being cut. Long, supportive. We're on the same channel, RUTF, which is produced in Georgia with the peanuts, and in Rhode Island at a company called Adhesia, and it is a number of other states. So it is a homegrown American product which is useful in terms of saving youngsters' lives. Thank you, Mr. Long. Thank you very much.
I yielded before that. Yes,
Mr. Norton, you are recognized.